Hey, this is Nate from the bike company. I want to thank you for your recent bike purchase or protein suspension purchase, and want to go through some of the steps that are going to be important dialing in your suspension, particularly for our clients who are mail order or web order who don't have access in person to our staff. If you're local, highly recommend you come in and we work with you hands on. We're here for that. If not, we're always available by email, phone, chat. Any way you want to get a hold of us, really the after sales service is what we pride ourselves on to get you to that next level. So your bike's been set up in a baseline setting. Now, things to remember: at the bike company, we're pretty close to sea level. I think we're 75 feet or 125 feet, something like that. So if you shift the bike to altitude, or if you're traveling to altitude, do take a look at your suspension setup. It's going to shift. That's to be expected. A couple other things: when we count clicks, we do it from full open. Now, other people do it from full close. The reason we do it from full open, we're all car, motorcycle. We've actually done some work with prosthetic companies. We grew up all counting that way based on there's a mechanical stop at full open in pretty much any suspension damper. At full close, sometimes their pintle will actually contact the damper body, and it'll deform it. It creates flow issues. So when you're looking to see, like, is that the last turn, maybe a little bit more. Some suspension doesn't actually have a physical hard stop for that, and it's the pintle valve that hits. It's not necessarily going to happen with Fox stuff. But it's just, for us, we think it's good practice not to close something down all the way, so we open it. So when we're counting clicks, 8 clicks means 8 clicks from full open, so all the way counterclockwise, plus 8 in. 1, 2, 3. To set your bike up, you're going to start out with getting the rear sag. A lot of ways to do that. Pretty much everybody's familiar with have your buddy hold you, lean up on the wall, bounce on the bike. Push the travel ring up and get it dialed in. That is pretty standard. Typically, you're looking between 25% for a real cross-country firm feeling to 33% in the rear. I do highly recommend that you measure your suspension. We're talking about in a 55 millimeter stroke shock, like on this lunch ride, the difference between 25 and 33% is 2 of the travel rings. So it's gonna be something that's really hard if you're trying to be precise to visually see. So you're gonna wanna go ahead and measure it. The other thing that it's gonna do by measuring your sag, it gives you a hard point for the conversation in terms of, this is what I'm trying to do. Pumps, every pump's a little different. The new digital ones tend to be pretty close. So if you're working with a digital pump, our numbers should be pretty close. We work with fresh digital pumps. We put them in and out of service pretty quick. But if you're using, like, this is my home pump, reality is this is pretty far off from a digital pump at the shop. So if I'm married to the number, well, then I have all sorts of setup issues because this one doesn't want to do what that one does. If I'm more leaning on, cool, I want this many millimeters of sag, it's easier to kind of disregard to look at it in variation on this pump versus X number to X number. Why doesn't this match? I'm looking at the percentage of sag, those match, and then PSI, I'll get it figured out to where I want it to be. Once you get the PSI set, you're going to set the rebound. Rebound is based on your ground speed. So 2 riders could be vastly different in weight. They'll have similar frequency on the rebound. They're looking to have the bike correct before the next terrain feature. Those 2 different weight riders, however, aren't going to have the same number of clicks. The heavier rider is going to have more rebound control because the air spring's pushing back harder with more PSI on the piston. So just because you and your buddy ride at the same pace, if your weight is substantially different, something to think about. After you get the rebound set, you're going to work with the compression. Now on this DPX2, there's a low speed compression inside the 3-way switch. It's an Allen key adjustment. It's used typically for support. So if you want the bike to stand up a little taller in the corners, um, the X2, DHX2 are going to have a high and low speed compression, which are really nice features to tune in um, based on shaft speed. So the high speed is high shaft speed, and low is obviously low shaft speed. And typically they're going to be within a few clicks of each other. Generally, you're not going to see somebody with 2 clicks on one and 12 clicks on the other. That's going to be an issue. Generally, they're going to be somewhat in line where you would expect to see them. After you do the compression on your rear shock, you're going to start playing with the volume spacing. Volume spacing helps with the ramp rate and therefore top out and how lively the shock is. Depending on the leverage ratio of the bike, the volume spacing can be real critical to making a bike work or not work at all. To change the volume spacers, real simple concept, make sure you air down the shock or the fork. Otherwise, you're going to have a air pressure rocket, which is no good. Also, it tends to, if you do have a rocket, they tend to pull the threads apart, and that's a real expensive fix. You don't want to deal with that. So air the system down. For me, I don't have the best hands, so I use a strap wrench on the rear shock. Get it open. It's really important inside your shock, don't use anything that's going to scratch anything in there. If you burr interior shaft or something, it's going to eat up seals. It's going to create all sorts of problems. This isn't the place where you want to stick your diamond encrusted screwdriver to pull down a rubber O-ring. You'll see in the video I use my fingers, and then you're going to get the containment washer down. I use my fingers as well, kind of wiggle it left and right. For the actual volume spacer on this shock, it's a singular volume spacer, so if you want this one, you take out that one and put this one in. You don't add them together. Some other shocks you do add up to a certain number. You'll see I use a pencil without a sharpened end, just what I had laying around that wasn't going to mar anything. Again, don't scratch the internals of your shock. You're going to be bummed. So when you go to air your shock back up, another trick, this is one of my most common things that hits my sales guys' desks, is my shock's losing air every time I fill it up. There's a couple different reasons for that. One, negative air chamber charging, where your fork charges the negative air chamber at full extension. Your rear shock has to be cycled to charge the negative air chamber. It cycles probably about a third of the way in, and it'll charge. It takes probably 5 or 6 pumps to get the negative air system to charge. It'll do things like from 150 psi, it'll drop to 120 when you charge that negative air pressure or negative air chamber. That's going to make a huge difference in your riding. More than one time, I've jumped on a bike and kind of forgot, or been talking to people at the shop, whatever I'm doing, and it get out to, have it set, check the sag, it's fine. You bounce on it a few times in the parking lot, and all of a sudden you're sitting at 50% sag instead of 33% sag. If you've got a pump in your car, you're fine. If not, you're hoping that the compression controls will give you enough to have a decent ride. So again, cycle your shock, especially if you're airing it up and down large amounts. Pre-charging your pump is another thing as far as air loss and or minute adjustments. So to pre-charge your pump, before you get the pump all the way onto the Schrader, but after you've made an air seal, so you're looking for a pretty finite spot where the O-ring's compressed, but it hasn't opened the Schrader to the suspension. You're going to pump your shock a few times. Your goal is to get it similar to what you think is in the shock. And then you go ahead and tighten it all the way on. That's going to open the system. That's going to give you the best bet at an accurate reading, because the shock and your fork are both relatively small air chambers. When you enlarge that air chamber by adding the length of the hose and the gauge, the number is going to go down. So real common, when I first started riding, you'd hear people all the time, well, you got to put your shock 10 psi over whatever you think you need, because it loses 10 psi when you unhook the pump. Well, it's not exactly true. The hiss that you hear is typically from the pump and not from the shock. You really have to be doing something kind of squirrely to have the Schrader not pretty instantly seal. Um, but when you go and hook the pump back up, if you don't pre-charge it, it will drop. And so you're looking at, well, where's this air coming or going from? Well, it's coming from your pump. One of these days I'll lengthen one of these by 50 feet and I'll drain a shock with just hooking it up. Because for some reason it seems to be doubted every once in a while. It's pretty funny. So on your fork is a similar concept. You're going to want to set it up. Once the rear end's set up, you want to match the fork in terms of frequency, and then you're going to adjust the bias to the fork. Fox has pretty good numbers on their website as far as starting points. 15% for a firm setup, 20% for a plush setup. As you get faster as a rider, your fork is going to become stiffer and stiffer in comparison to your rear suspension. Even is the very baseline for like any setup. You never ever go lighter on the fork than the rear end because it'll find holes and dig and it's going to try to flip you over. As you get faster and more aggressive, give that fork a little bit more bias to help you through the holes that you're going to try to punch through. Also, once we rock the bike up at a descending angle, there's actually more weight put on the fork. So a lot of reasons to have a little bit more bias. That bias is going to be done both by air pressure and by compression. If you're looking for a little bit better ramp or a little more ramp, you're going to add volume spacers. If you're looking for a little more linear or less ramp, you're going to take them out. Again, air it down. On this one, Fox sells a chamferless socket. It's a great thing to have. I don't have one with me today, so I'm using a adjustable wrench. You're going to see that I pushed down real hard on the adjustable wrench, and I'm not really using it to leverage so much as holding the tool down and just kind of thumping it to break it free. You don't want to roll the edges of these. They're very, very short. And frankly, they look like hell if you start rolling the edges of them. So be careful. I do suggest the Fox tool, but if you're making a video at your home office and you don't have one, if you've got decent hands, you can use a variety of tools. So on this fork, this is a grip 2, means you have high and low speed compression and high and low speed rebound. The high and low speed compression is similar to the rear end, where it's shaft speed. So low speed compression will give you a little bit more support going into corners or really railing into something and feeling like you need the bike to stand a little taller. High speed is a little bit more on the top out. On the rebound, your low speed and high speed rebound on these bikes, you leave the high speed rebound alone until you get almost 3/4 of the way, maybe I think it's halfway through the low speed rebound, and then you go basically click for click. So if you're not using a lot of rebound, meaning the system hasn't gotten to where it's really trying to control that air pressure coming back out, you're not going to mess with the high speed rebound. Once you get halfway through, I think it's 8 clicks or 9 clicks in that range, then it goes 1-for-1 with the high speed, and that high speed helps slow down that real hard punch back from a total bottom out. And it's a super nice feature. That's how simple it is. Don't get too in the weeds trying to set that up. It's pretty easy. Again, rear setup first, sag, rebound, compression, volume spacing, typically how you're going to dial in. And then same thing with the fork, you're looking for the bias on that system. So we're going to go ahead and have some more of these coming with some more finite details, but this is the basics of what you're doing. If you're going to take anything away from this, you're measuring your suspension, the sag. It's going to be a much easier way to always come to a conclusion with what you're trying to do setup wise, whether or not you're at altitude, whether you're down here at sea level, whatever you're doing. Pumps are a little different. So takeaway, I'm measuring my suspension, and that this is going to be a fluid conversation. That's to say, as you get faster, as you get more comfortable with your new products, you're actually going to be speeding up the rebound in order to have the bike get ready for the next terrain obstacle faster. You might end up increasing the compression, and that's again comes back to the physics of force. It's mass times acceleration. So as you're riding faster, that same mass is trying to push into the next terrain feature, rock, whatever, a little harder. So you might want to resist it with a little more compression. Um, that's really kind of where you want to go with this, and stay in touch with our guys. Our guys really pride themselves on after sales service, and it isn't something where here's your numbers, stay with these numbers forever. It really truly is. Here's your numbers as a starting point, and especially with the Pro Tune stuff, we'll see a jump in rider competency and rider confidence really fast. It doesn't always blow my mind to see a rider changing rebound 2 weeks in, a week and a half in, 5, 6 rides, where all of a sudden they've PR'd everything and they're actually, attacking the trail and, not dead sailoring through things, and they're able to have a bike that's the setup isn't knife edge. You're going to have these, they're going to change. So, utilize our team, be part of the conversation, and we look forward to working with you on that. And we'll see some more videos here in the future from bikeco.com.